You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
This negotiation has been enforced, or forced rather, and imposed, and it hasn't necessarily been on Ukraine's terms. So I think that they are playing a waiting game to see if the situation will relent somewhat, the pressure will relent somewhat, the conditions are better for entering into negotiations, rather than rushing into it simply because on the whim of the US president.
You haven't been alone. You haven't been alone. We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and you men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yeah.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
The Americans, or for the Americans, a bad deal is better than no deal. But for the Ukrainians, a bad deal is worse than no deal. And that is a fundamental tension between the two. So there will need to be some form of impasse break in order to move this forward. President Zelensky can't sell out his country for personal and patriotic reasons, even if he's willing to cede power in order to get some form of compromise from the Americans. That would work, but it's not yet working for the Americans, who are doubling down on the restrictions they're placing on the Ukrainians, of course.
Маніпуляція. Нічого більше, нічого серйозного там нема. І я вважаю, що не потрібно дуже хвилюватися іменно по цьому рішенні. Це рішення не остаточне, я впевнена в цьому. Дивіться, які там обурення серед мас людей.
Сумно.
Ну і для вас як?
Я думаю, щось придумаємо. Я думаю, у нас сильна дипломатія, і в світі ми не одні.
Всі бачать, наскільки швидко розвиваються дипломатичні події. Сьогодні наші команди України та Сполучених Штатів Америки почали працювати над зустріччю. Говорили Андрій Єрмак та Майк Вольц. Є позитивний рух. Сподіваємось на перші результати наступного тижня.
The step up in Ukraine's own intelligence gathering capabilities and its own weapons making abilities, and the fact that the Europeans are not abandoning the Ukrainians, then we do absolutely see a picture that's not quite as bleak as is sometimes depicted, albeit very serious, on the basis that the United States was, the ultimate backstop, the ultimate guarantor, which it no longer is.
Гармата!
Постріл. Постріл.
Zelensky's resignation would not mean that he would be automatically replaced by a Russian puppet, except in the event of a total Ukrainian defeat in the war, of course. There are other Zelenskys out there. There are other talented individuals who will need to defend the country's territorial integrity and independence. I think the minimal deal is under question. For a start, if the Americans are withdrawing with one hand, it puts less pressure on the Ukrainians to do a deal. On the other hand, it is, to be fair, the Ukrainians do want to salvage something from the relationship. I think it's also questionable that President Trump is purely transactional and purely commercial in his interests, because if he were, then actually this deal would have been done last week and he would not have put the Ukrainians off in the manner in which he did, or ambushed them in the manner in which they were. Saudi views itself as a middling to great power, and obviously a great power in energy and financial terms, and its motivations are indeed principally commercial. It's going to be a difficult one. Ultimately, the Ukrainians aren't going to let themselves get pushed around by a mediator that they don't entirely trust. But then again, the Russians don't trust any mediators either, for what it's worth.
And as you really have a lot of things to talk about, bilateral and also in the region and other areas. So
most countries are increasing their defense spending as a percentage of GDP, and so this is happening. The problem is there's a gap between the Europeans realizing this, making it happen, and the lifeline that Ukraine has under more deleterious circumstances. That gap is ultimately the crucial question as to whether Ukraine can hold out that long.
Thank you very much.
С времен Наполеона, нашествия Наполеона. До сих пор кому-то не имется все. Есть еще люди, которые хотят вернуться к временам Наполеона, забывают, чем это закончилось.
The Russians, of course, have been emboldened and encouraged by recent moves from the US. That gives them a morale boost and the ability to stay in the game longer. On the other hand, summer is coming. It does get a little bit easier in those physical conditions, and Ukraine has been stockpiling in the knowledge that this was likely to happen, and can therefore hold out probably longer than many people assume. So, in fact, there is still all to play for, and as has been the case for the last few years now, then this war could actually go either way, and much depends on the political will of the West to step up to the plate in America's relative absence.
Well, I think what's going to happen is Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice. I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a certain different way that only I know. Only I know. They have no choice either.